Good morning, brothers and sisters. It's John Ruffle again for our daily coffee time talks. And I've just been reflecting upon coming out of lockdown, some of the things that perhaps we need to visit and consider in our lives. I've been going on about this need for not returning back to the way things were, this yearning to simply return to life as normal for weeks on end or almost on a daily basis. But what does this post-lockdown life look like for us as Christians? It's a really important topic. And I'm not pretending to not be at times somewhat controversial. And I just want to preface this by saying these are my own thoughts and I offer them to you for you to consider in your heart. And please don't say that, well, I am dictating that this must happen or that must happen. No, this is a discussion. And I wish it was a two-way discussion, but obviously that's not possible via YouTube. It's a little bit more possible on Facebook because you can comment. You can comment on YouTube as well. I welcome those comments coming through. And I still have got in my heart to do a Zoom mini conference where I can gather, or some experts in different fields can gather together, and perhaps I'll moderate it, or if I can persuade one or two brothers who I know who are more learned than I can moderate it if they wish. Or indeed my wife can moderate it. I've actually asked her if she'd like to be the one that poses the questions. And just 5 or 6 of us do a round table to discuss some of the challenges and some of the visions and some of the opportunities and some of the difficulties and pitfalls that we may well be facing coming out of lockdown. I've been wanting to do something along these lines for the last 2 months, but I think maybe it hasn't been the right time until now. So that's something, brothers and sisters, you could pray for, that we can pull that together. And it'll be something we'll put up onto YouTube, and people can watch not just what I'm seeing or saying, but we can have a variety of viewpoints from a Christian perspective. And yet I won't limit it only to Catholics. Which brings me to today's topic. And I'm not sure if I'll get through all of these items, but I've got 7 points that I want to bring to light that particularly affect those of us who are in the Catholic Church and would probably consider ourselves to be Roman Catholic in particular. Now, some of you guys are going to be saying, well, John, you were only received into the Catholic Church a few years ago, so what right do you have to speak? Well, I would counter that, and it's a legitimate question. And I would respond to that by saying that although I've spent decades in Christian ministry in various forms throughout all my adult life, I would offer that perhaps it is that the Lord has brought me into the Catholic Church for such a time as this, to help us all grow in our faith and draw closer to our Lord Jesus Christ and to one another. So here are some of my thoughts. And first of all, by the way, you can hear 2 things probably. It's a pity this isn't in stereo. On the one hand, you can hear my son, who's now woken up. On the other hand, I've deliberately opened the kitchen window because you might be able to hear the birds, which is why I open the window, but you also might be able to hear the traffic in the distance, some of it from the M5. And I do that because it's such a contrast to 6 weeks ago when you could go outside and it was still and quiet. And things are returning back to a normality of sorts. But how do we view that normality? Number one, 7 points. These are just my ideas, all right? So, take them or leave them, discern them. Catholics are going to need to emerge from their Roman bubble. Now, what I mean by that, last week on EWTN, George Weigel, author of The Next Pope, The Office of Peter and a Church of Mission, or Church in Mission rather, on World Over Live, which is Raymond ARROYO's Catholic program on EWTN TV. If you don't watch EWTN TV, then I recommend it, and I particularly recommend Raymond ARROYO to you and his weekly news roundup, World Over Live. And he was saying that the church has become too Romocentric, that's his term, too centered on Rome, to the exclusion of all the great things that are happening throughout the billion people that claim to be Catholic in the world today, and that we need to be looking to equip and empower, strengthen the ministries locally, the bishops, priests, deacons, and the lay people. I don't really like that term laity, but we'll let that one slide for now. Okay. So that's the first thing. We need to merge out of this Catholic bubble where everything revolves around the given Pope of the day. Right, number two, we need to focus on preparing a people of God. And this kind of leads on from and gives justification for what I just said about getting our eyes a little bit off Rome and onto the local community level of the church. Focusing on preparing a people of God. Very few Catholics, I find, and this is general knowledge, very few Catholics have a sound biblical knowledge or understanding, because typically only Catholics who are in ordained ministry or religious have taken time to study the Bible, because it's not been an emphasis in the church and it's not been encouraged. There hasn't been the opportunity collectively for studying the Bible. Yet if we look at the book of Acts, they gathered and they stayed in the apostles' doctrine, house to house, eating with gladness hearts and so forth, and awe was around them all. So what I'm saying is that we need to recover our love for the Bible and the scriptures, and that's something that I pray that we might have a hunger for, individually and personally. And then in your parishes, you may want to consider and talk to your parish priest about forming groups that will be biblically focused on actually looking at scriptures. And you can start by looking at the gospel of the day, or the reading of the day, or Sunday's reading, and work from there. And that's a great place to start. Okay, so we need, and this preparation of the people of God, we need to be biblically literate, and we need to prepare people for action, prepare people in our hearts for outreach, for the evangelization of the church. Right. Where's your slippers? Sweetheart, I think they might be upstairs. If you take a look around and see if you can find them, okay, my love? And I'll be with you in a few minutes. Luke wants his slippers, which is fine. I've got my slippers on. Right, number 3. We have to engage young people and give them space to flourish. Well, that's really funny, because unscripted, Luke has just come in and asked me a question. And so I'm going to have to practice what I'm preaching here. And we need to make room and engage young people. I was thinking in terms of teens and those in their 20s, particularly because these are very formative years. If you look back in your life, those of you that are past the teens and past the 20s, you probably will see a pattern where you'll find that you were forming your careers, forming relationships. That was the focus of your life. And so when we talk about people re-engaging in the church, we need to be looking at this group of people and very, very formative in their lives. Oh, we need to say good morning to Bunny. Say, hello everyone, how are you? It's good to see you. I think I like the idea of looking after the young people. So, hello. Bye-bye. All right, I'm going to eat my breakfast now. Thank you very much.
Yeah, can we do this?
Did you want to see? I'll show you the people. Then, oh, here he is. Oh, you okay? I'll talk to you in a minute, Luke. Okay, thank you. Thank you for Bunny. Okay, right. Look, you need to be quiet now, Darren. I'm recording. All right. I'll talk to you in a minute. Right, engaging the young people. We've really engaged the young people today, haven't we? Example of how older people can engage the youth. And I say youth, I really am looking at late teens and 20s. You know, we tend to put youth ministry into like 8, 9, 10-year-olds, but it's college age, maybe sixth form, that type of thing, right up to late 20s. Very, very formative. One way we can do it is through mentoring. The role of mentoring is so important, and I can see I'm not going to have time to go through all 7 of these, so we're going to have 4, 5, 6 and 7 perhaps tomorrow. The example of the Beatles and George Martin. George Martin was a record producer. He was classically trained in music. It's not unusual for that to happen even in the pop world, but he wasn't really au fait with the rock and roll scene and so forth. He'd only dabbled a little bit in it. And Brian Epstein, who was the Beatles manager back in the early days in 1962, in February 1962, met with George Martin. Epstein was a record promoter in Liverpool. George Martin worked for EMI Records in London and was a sound engineer and recorder. And they met, and Epstein was saying, look, I've got this great group in Liverpool, you need to see them. They're called the Beatles. George Martin was a little bit curious. He said, well, okay, let's listen to a demo tape, blah, blah, blah. He invited them down for a recording session for a demonstration, and he was very underwhelmed. And rather cheekily, he invited the boys into the control room and said, well, what do you guys, you know, he was frustrated by the whole thing. He says, what do you guys don't like about this? And George Harrison said, I don't like your tie. And everybody burst into laughter. And now, George Martin had been working with The Goon Show, which was a comedy show, and they all roared into laughter, and he recognised there was a spark of comedy, there was a spark of camaraderie about the Beatles, and he signed them. And famously, on their first records, they received half a penny to share between the 4 of them in royalties. Be that as it may. Why do I mention that? It's because a prime example, George Martin was 14 years older than Lennon. So we're looking at 2 generations coming together. George Martin, known as the 5th Beatle, because he was so influential in their growth and in their development. So not only was it Brian Epstein, but George Martin that made the Beatles what they were and enabled them to develop individually. Whether you like Beatle music, whether you agree with Beatle music or not, it was highly influential to the 1960s. So that is an example of mentorship in action, and we need to recover that, and we need to build it in the Church of Jesus Christ, learning how to mentor our young people, to let them free to express themselves, recognize their gifting, and walk with Jesus. I'm out of time, so we'll continue this later on. Thank you for watching. It's John Ruffle. Jesus is Lord.